Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the last day of our globally speaking week of ELT talks and seminars. It's lovely to see people from literally all over the world. I saw Panama, Estonia, Chile, Italy, Greece, England, lots of places, all coming up. Holland, lots. Germany, Switzerland. So welcome to you all. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are, and Czech Republic, another one there just come up. Okay, something I will show you before we start and I introduce Nicky. I will just say that all this week's and all our seminars are recorded, and we do get lots of requests from people. Can we see the recording? Or I know that already we've had somebody who's unfortunately got to leave early, so they would like to see the recording. And I will show you on the website very briefly here before we begin. And I hand over where you can find those. So you should all be able to see my screen, and we've got the Delta Publishing website here. If you scroll down to the bottom, past all our lovely new books, teaching tips, all the events, you'll see an area here at the very bottom called the members area. If you go to the benefits of membership, you will see that there are 3 boxes here and the recordings, and all you need to do is log in. So you're already logged in because you created your account to be able to join the webinars this week or today. So you just need to log in, and then you can access all the recordings. Obviously, at the moment, not all the recordings are up there from this week, but there's a list of them from our previous ones, and by the end of next week, hopefully we should have all of the recordings up there from this week. Okay, so that's just at the bottom here and in the benefits of membership part. So I shall stop that, and hopefully Nicky's there. Yes, there we are. Good afternoon. Hello. Nicky, how are you?
Hi Martin, I'm fine. Hello everybody.
Lovely to see you. Right, so I don't really need to give you an introduction, but I'm going to. Everybody knows who you are, but I shall just give a brief introduction to those that you aren't familiar. Nicky is the Director of Pedagogy at the Consultants E, an online training and development consultancy. Nicky is a teacher, teacher educator, consultant, international plenary speaker, and author of several prize-winning methodology books about technology in ELT. Her interests, her research interests include blended and online learning. She is the author of Teaching Online and Going Mobile for Delta Publishing. And without further ado, I shall hand over to you, Nicky.
Thank you so much, Martin. And hello again, everybody, and welcome. I love that, Martin, you said I'm an international plenary speaker. Of course, these days, when you're doing talks like this on Zoom, we're all international speakers. It's really quite easy, isn't it? Anyway, lovely to see so many of you here, and welcome. And as Martin was saying, I've written several books. Here's a screenshot of them. 2 of them for Delta, as you can see. But you can also probably see that there's a common theme here, which is technology. This is something that I'm particularly interested in. So the application of technology to the language classroom, really. But I've actually been teaching online myself since 1997. Can you imagine? I mean, that was so long ago that it was before YouTube, it was before Skype. I was the academic director of an online MA program, which was run through a number of Spanish and Latin American universities. And we used to have online tutorials. I was tutoring some of the groups. And we would have these real-time tutorials. And the only tool that we could use for real-time interaction was MSN Messenger. So I don't know if any of you are actually old enough to remember MSN Messenger, but it's basically a text program. So it would be like trying to run an MA tutorial in a chat box. That's essentially what it was. So the fact that we're now able to just use video conferencing so easily is really quite revolutionary. A lot of things have changed, but I've always been interested in teaching online and using technology in the language teaching classroom as well, as you can see. But that's enough about my professional background. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. Those of you who don't know me, you may be listening to my voice and wondering where I'm from. There's There's something about my accent that you maybe can't quite place. If you'd like to guess, please put it in the chat window, have a go. But meanwhile, I want to show you something that I have on my desk here at home. And this is a statue. As you can see, it's bronze. It's about that size. It's heavy. And I don't know if you can tell which part of the world you think it comes from. I'll hold it a little bit closer. I can see the accents you're guessing there. New Zealand, Australia, not bad. I think somebody said South Africa before, but yeah, South African. Yes, Vicky, exactly. I am from South Africa. So the continent that this statue comes from, clearly, it's an African statue. Now, I'm showing you the statue because it's something that's really, really precious to me. It's an important object. It's not particularly valuable, but it's something that my father gave me when I left South Africa many years ago. My father is South African, of course, and he had spent, before he got married and before he had me, he had spent a year on a motorbike in Nigeria. And he had bought this lovely bronze statue on his travels. And he gave it to me. He said, look, you know, you're going to be traveling a lot in your life, and I just want I want to give you something to take with you. Of course, it's extremely heavy, so probably just as well that I left South Africa by boat, because I'm sure, you know, Ryanair wouldn't be allowing me to put this in my luggage with the weight. But I love this because it reminds me of my dad and, you know, his year in Nigeria, in which, according to him, he pushed his motorbike around Nigeria because it just kept breaking down. It was so old. But I have it here on my desk, and it's something that just reminds me of him, and I see it every day. So I just wanted to share a precious object with you. Now, what I've essentially done with you is a little warmer activity that I have often done with new groups online, whether language students or teachers, it doesn't really matter. But sharing a precious object with the group that you're working with is a very nice way for them to learn something about you that maybe, you know, is not that obvious. The next stage in the activity itself is that I ask my students to then, you know, leave the camera for a minute and go and find a precious object in their house. Everybody has something. People come back with all sorts of things, and I give them some suggestions before they go. So, for example, I say you might have a precious piece of jewelry or some kind of souvenir or a photo or a card or a child's drawing or a family heirloom or an object or whatever. And give people a couple of minutes. They come back, and then everybody has their cameras on, and then we all hold up our precious objects to the camera so we can see, you know, in the kind of gallery view in the video conferencing session, we can see all the cameras, we can see all the faces, and we can see everybody with their object. And then I'll nominate a student. So, for example, I might say, James, can you tell us what your object is? And James will tell us a few things about it. Obviously, if you have a class of students of 10 or 15 or more, you don't nominate everybody because that would, you know, take forever. A nice way to do it is to nominate 1 or 2 people at the beginning of each class over time, and then get people to ask questions about the object as well as they go along. So it's a lovely little kind of warmer, getting to know you, icebreaker activity that can work really well in these kinds of live online video conferencing classes. And that's what I want to talk about today, is how do we motivate and engage our students when we're running this kind of class? So a live class in some kind of video conferencing platform. So the way I've structured the session is that we have a warmer activity, which I've just done with you. It's a warmer activity. Unfortunately, I couldn't get you to share your objects. There are too many and you don't have cameras. But with a class, I would certainly get my class to also share their objects with me. I want to talk through a couple of current scenarios for online teaching. Then I'm going to look at what I think are the 3 key elements for engaging and motivating your students in your live online classes. I want to look at different types of activities that you could use. I've just shared one with you already, fairly simple. And then I want to summarize at the end with a couple of key takeaways for you. Okay, I'm going to invite you to use the chat as well during the session now and again. All right, so the current scenarios, of course, for a year now, since March last year, pretty much all of us have been teaching online. Maybe we're not teaching online right now, but we probably have some experience of teaching online. And there have been a number of scenarios or ways that we've been teaching online over this past year. because of the COVID epidemic. The first scenario there on the slide is this fully face-to-face in the physical classroom, which is the traditional way, what we've all been doing for many, many years, right? Just face-to-face physical online teaching in the bricks and mortar classroom. The second one is this idea of face-to-face rotation. And this is something that has been here. I live in Spain, by the way, so we've kind of been through all of these scenarios at some point. The face-to-face rotation is where we have half the class coming for the face-to-face into the face-to-face physical classroom, and we have half the students half of the time online. So they come maybe on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to the physical classroom, and then Tuesday and Thursday the students are doing work online at home. Maybe they're doing homework, maybe they're doing stuff on our virtual learning environment, looking at PDFs, whatever it is, doing work in the paper workbook even, perhaps. Okay, so that's the rotation model. Then we have, of course, the fully online model, and that can include these kinds of synchronous or real-time classes through video conferencing. And it can also include asynchronous work, or work that's not in real time. For example, through emails, through virtual learning environments, on Google Docs, whatever it might be, you know, the digital course book. The fourth one is the idea of blended. Again, this is an idea that's been around for quite a long time, and it's usually used to refer to having some sort of face-to-face plus online combination. There's no correct percentage here. It can depend on your syllabus and the aims of your course and the availability, really, and how much your school is open at the moment. Then we have the fifth scenario here, hybrid, and this is probably a word that you've started to hear quite a lot over the last year. Hybrid, the way it's being used in our profession is interesting. It's being used to refer to this idea of the simultaneous face-to-face physical classroom, so the bricks and mortar classroom, plus some students are online at the same time, being kind of beamed in. So you might have a Zoom connection like this, but I'm actually teaching in front of a physical class, and I'm beaming in a couple of students at the same time. And that's the way the term is being used now. Hybrid previously was used to refer to blended learning in a more general sense. Sorry, let me go back a bit. We also have this hybrid rotation model. So here we have half the students are in the physical classroom again, let's say Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And on those Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, the other half is being beamed in real time. And then they swap around on Tuesday and Thursday. So those who were beamed in on Monday, Wednesday, Friday are in the physical classroom, and the others are being beamed in, if that makes sense, right? So it's like the rotation model, but with a hybrid model. Another term for the hybrid model that you may have heard is high flex, HY, FLEX, and it's a combination of two terms, high, hybrid, and flexibility. But actually, the real high flex model has a third option, which is the face-to-face classroom, the beamed in, and then the people doing completely online asynchronous work. That's what the true high flex model looks like, but I haven't seen that being used. In our profession, yes, high flex, exactly. That's it, HYFLEX, usually one word together there in the chat. And then I've got there as a seventh option, other, because I think I've outlined everything that's been happening as far as I know in schools, but I wonder if you are in some kind of different scenario or some kind of scenario that I haven't come across or thought of. And if so, please add to the chat window. Meanwhile, though, which of these scenarios have you experienced since March? You may have been through a couple of them by now. Can you just type the number in the chat window? Which of these scenarios have you been through since March? All right, so we have mostly 3. Fully online, okay. 1 and 3. So face-to-face classroom and then to fully online. Some people are saying blended. A couple of people I saw there 5, which is hybrid. All right, a real mix. And some people 1, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 5. Yeah. Boy, it's been a bit of a crash course, hasn't it, in online teaching? I mean, last March, it was a very much a sort of a minority interest. and now suddenly everybody's doing it. What's been interesting from my perspective, having been teaching online for such a long time, is that, before, people thought that I was quite weird and why would anybody want to teach online? And now I think that there's been a kind of a sea change in that people are more aware of the possibilities of online, that, it can be done badly, but it can also be done extremely well. And what I've been seeing is face-to-face teachers who've really done an amazing job, considering that many were thrown into online teaching, from Friday to Monday. It was literally with no preparation and no training and sometimes no support. And hats off. I think the majority of language teachers that I've come across have done a pretty brilliant job. So yes, Sharon, you were thrown into it from Friday to Monday. Believe me, there were many teachers who that happened to. All a bit of a shock. Now, though, of course, we're at the stage where we can step back after a year. We have quite a lot of experience under our belts and start to look at what works and what doesn't. Certainly, there's been a steep learning curve, is what I've heard people say. Thank you very much for sharing your scenarios, by the way, a really interesting mix and fairly typical, I think, that people have been cycling in and out of those. Okay, let's do another activity. I want to do a quiz with you. Now, the way that I would do this with students is how I want to explain it first. One of the issues with live sessions like this that teachers often tell me about is they say, okay, but my students won't put their cameras on. I have my camera on, but my students just won't put their cameras on. And this is something that we need to address, I think. It's just far more engaging for everybody if you can see your students. The question is how? Well, one way is, if you're teaching under 18s, is that it's part of the kind of rules. You have your class rules in the physical face-to-face classroom, or you have your class rules for the online classroom, and you can let parents know about this if you're teaching younger learners. The deal is camera is on. And one of my colleagues who's teaching in a language school here in Spain was telling me about how he had a group of younger learners, about 10 or 11, and one of them was saying, well, my camera's not working and I can't put my camera on. So the teacher said, well, that's fine. I'll just email your mum after the class and let her know. So, I mean, within 5 minutes, the camera was on, strangely enough. So there's that sort of thing. If you're working with younger learners, that's the rules. If you're working with older learners, you can actually train them up. So introduce having cameras on slowly, bit by bit. And one way is through activities. Here's an example of an activity that requires a camera in a quiz format. The first thing is, you ask the students, let's imagine everybody's off camera, okay? They're off camera, they don't like having their cameras on, they're off camera. You hold up a piece of paper and you say, I want everybody just to get 3 pieces of paper ready, 3 blank pieces of paper like this, okay? And I'm going to ask you to put on your cameras and show me when the papers are ready. Then you pause for a minute, students get their bits of paper, you say, okay, everybody, cameras on, show me your papers. And then you see everybody is holding up their papers. You say, okay, keep the cameras on, take your first piece of paper, and I want you to write the letter A in really big letters on your piece of paper. And then you wait, the students do that, and then you say, okay, so when you have your A, hold it up. Everybody holds up A. Finished. Okay, now your second piece of paper, I want you all to write the letter S. You hold it up, students write it, they hold up their S, and then the third piece, I want you to write the letter N. And when you have your 3 pieces of paper, I want you to show me your 3 pieces of paper. Okay, so you can see how I'm using the camera here, and you can imagine that all my students, the little row of cameras, they're all holding up their bits of paper. And you say, okay, now keep the cameras on. I'm going to say a statement, and I want you to hold up one of these papers in response. The first question is, dear language teachers, what do you think these letters stand for? I'll give you a clue. Adverbs of frequency. What do you think they stand for? Do you want to put that in the chat? We've got A, S, and N. There we go, yeah. Sometimes, always, never. You can always spot a language teacher, right? So tell the students what they stand for at the end. Tell them to get ready. Say, I'm going to read a statement and I want you to hold up your response, either sometimes if you do it sometimes, or never, N if you do it never, or always if you do it always, okay? Now, With you, I would like to do it with bits of paper, but there are too many people and we haven't got your cameras on, so I'm going to invite you to use the chat box. But let me just reiterate, the students are holding up a bit of paper. You're trying to get them to use their cameras. All right, so let's do the quiz with you. I'm going to read a sentence and I want you to put in the chat box, A for always, S for sometimes, N for never. First question, first statement. My students all have their cameras turned on for all of the class. So A, S, or N. Oh, I've got quite a few alwayses. We've got a couple of nevers and some sometimes. Okay, a mix then. A few nevers. I mean, my suggestion would be, you know, students have the camera on for all the class. It's important to be able to see people. Part of engagement comes from seeing other people. Okay, well, you can see that the statements that I'm giving you, of course, are related to you, not to what you would ask your students. Second statement. I ask each of my students to use their microphones or their audio several times in every class. I ask my students to use their microphone or audio several times in every class. Okay, everybody's putting A. I saw a couple of S's. A. Okay, a lot of alwayses. Yeah. Good. Yeah, I mean, again, you know, we're language teachers. If they're not producing language through the audio, then, you know, maybe we need to rethink the kinds of activities that we were doing. Of course, we can put our students into breakout rooms to use their audio. All right, statement number three. I put my students into breakout rooms for pair or group work in every class, at least once. I put my students into breakout rooms for pair or group work at least once in every class. Quite a few sometimes, always, never. All right, again, I mean, my suggestion would be if you have a 50-minute class, you want to have at least one breakout room activity, at least one, so that you're changing the focus and that you're also giving your students an opportunity to use the camera and the audio, especially in practice. But for one-on-one, of course, they would be sitting on their own in a breakout room, but presumably you're speaking to them in the main room. All right, statement number 4. My students use the chat box and or the participation buttons. So participation buttons would be like thumbs up, thumbs down, smiley face, that kind of thing. My students use the chat box or the participation buttons in my class, in my live class. Always, sometimes. Yeah. Sure, it's another tool that you can use, right? So for example, for quiz questions, you could make a statement and then students could use the thumbs up or the thumbs down. If they agree or disagree, they could use the participation buttons instead of the chat. All right, another statement for you. I use external web tools like Kahoot or Quizlet or similar during my live classes. I use external web tools like Kahoot or Quizlet or similar. Okay, we've got sometimes and always. Okay, yeah, another option certainly to make things a little bit more varied. Next statement. I get my students to use asynchronous tools like Google Docs to follow up or to prepare for my live class. So I get my students to use asynchronous tools like Google Docs to follow up or to prepare for my class. Yeah, and again, I think it's this, we've got a mix there, sometimes, always. Yeah, it's this idea again of preparing for a class and then also taking it somewhere, so that there's some kind of connection between your synchronous or your real-time classes and your asynchronous classes. Whatever they prepare in your or produce in this live class, in breakout rooms, for example, could lead into homework or preparing a Google Doc or some slides or whatever it might be, or to Moodle, as Carla says, wherever. Lovely, thanks. Okay, so just to recap, we used a chat room, but the idea would be to have your students throughout that activity using the bits of paper, which is one way to start introducing the obligatory use of the camera, because if they don't have their camera on, then they can't do this. Just don't offer them the chat box option. Tell them they need to use papers. Another way to do it would be to have agree, disagree statements, so that they would have to have the camera on and then they agree, thumbs up, thumbs down, and not sure they could do this in the middle. Again, so we're using the camera for that. If you're using, if you're teaching younger learners, you could actually get them to do physical things like move the chair back a little bit And then you could have them stand up or stand down if they agree or disagree, or, you know, put their arms out like this or their arms up like that or whatever. But some kind of physical movement could be introduced if you're teaching younger learners for quizzes. Justice says, what about for students that turn their camera up so I can only see their ceiling? I think you, you either have to have class rules or you have to use activities like I've just done, Justice, so that they have to take part, basically. We're encouraging them through task design to take part with their cameras. Other sort of physical responses could be, you know, that they have to clap their hands or they have to touch a part of their face for things, or whatever. But you can certainly just use a range of these kinds of techniques to ensure that your students are on camera. Okay, so that's a way to do a quiz that doesn't really require any external tools, but it does require a camera. So you'll remember that I mentioned that I want to look at elements that can help you create classes that are engaging, video conferencing classes that are engaging. And there are these three essential elements, I think. First of all, task design. Secondly, your online teacher skills. And thirdly, the structure of your model. And I want to look at each of those in turn. The first is task design. And I want to do a couple of tasks very, very shortly, very short tasks with you just to demonstrate. So here's the first one. Let's imagine that you are a group of, let's say, elementary students, sort of A2 on the CEFR. We've been doing some work on vocabulary of clothing. So we've had a previous class, maybe you've done some quizzes online, some asynchronous work on clothes. And now I'm going to do an activity with you, which is a review of clothing vocabulary, right? And I'm going to do this through a silent dictation. This is an activity, by the way, that my colleague Lindsay Clandfield shared with me, which is just a really, really lovely little, way of doing things, okay? So the way this works is I'm going to say an item. I'm going to actually say how many? 4 different items of clothing. I'm going to say them one by one, and I want you, it's a dictation, and I want you to write the word in the chat box. So it's an item of clothing. You're elementary students, you've seen these words before. And I'm going to hold up a number. So first word, second word, third word, fourth word. Now, I'm going to dictate this silently. You're going to have to read my lips. It does mean I look completely insane while I'm doing this, but it can be quite a lot of fun. So let's try the first one together first. Okay, so here comes word number 1. Yeah, good. Okay, I said it about 3 times. And yeah, you pretty much everybody got a t-shirt. Fantastic. Good. Good job. Okay. All right, second one. Here we go. Yeah, tie. Most of you got it. Not socks, no, tie. Well done. All right, let's try number 3. Well done, well done. Good. That was 2 syllables, a little trickier. Trousers, indeed. And let's do the last one, number 4. Let's go. Yeah, well done. Judy got it first. Trainers. That was tricky. So remember that this is, the students have seen these words before. This is really important. It's a review. It's a review activity. Of course, you know, you're proficient language speakers. You don't have a problem with clothing vocabulary. But this is a very effective and quite fun review activity for any vocabulary, any lexical set that you're working on with your learners. I've given you an example of clothes at a low level, but of course you could use any words that your students have been working on in previous classes. You could use phrasal verbs. If you're teaching English for academic purposes, you could use the words that you've been working on in the last few classes. It really doesn't matter as long as it's something the students have seen before. So it's a review. And of course, the next step is, you can guess what happens next. I've just done it, right? I've just done 4 words. What do you think the next step in the activity is? I'll give you a chance to put your ideas in the chat window there. Next stage of this review activity. Yes, exactly. There we go. Student has a go. Absolutely. So I would then say, okay, everybody, I want you each to write down 4 more clothing words. So you get everybody to brainstorm. They all write them down on a little piece of paper. And then you nominate. So you say, for example, let's see, we've got Donna. I'd say, Donna, okay, give us one of your words. Donna's on the camera. She puts her microphone on mute. She has a go. We write the words and we rotate around the class, giving people a turn. So quite a lot of fun. Okie doke. That, as I said before, is an activity from my colleague Lindsay Clantfield and can be fun, and again requires the camera. Here's another activity that I've used a lot also in asynchronous online teaching and works brilliantly. I've been using this for many, many years. Essentially, the idea is that students choose their top 5 of something. And there are a couple of examples on the slide. So top 5 favorite foods, places, Netflix series, excuses for not doing homework, 5 most hated grammar points. It doesn't matter, anything. You can give them a few ideas. It works well in a live session like this. If you give students a couple of minutes to choose a topic to choose top 5 for, note down their top 5, and then you can put them into breakout rooms in 2s or 3s, and they can share their top 5 and why it is their top 5. You let them do that for their 5 minutes or so, and then pull them back here into the main room and then get feedback. It's always nice to get partners to feedback on what their partners said rather than what they said, so that they're getting a little bit more practice. This also works extremely well as an asynchronous forum discussion. It can be a lot of fun. It's one of the activity types that I've seen the most, that generates some of the, the longest discussions. People just love it. It's often fun. People come up with some fun things. In an asynchronous forum discussion, people will sometimes share photos. If they're choosing their top 5 favorite places, for example, they'll include photos in their posts. It's a very simple activity, but it just works well. So you could try it out in a live class like this, in a breakout room, and or in an asynchronous forum, or indeed both. Take it from the live class into the asynchronous. Yeah, Carla says good on Padlet. Exactly. That would be, you could do it as a typed activity or even with voice notes. All right, so that was another type of activity I wanted to share with you. In terms of task design, I've shown you a couple of tasks now. There are things I think that are important to keep in mind when you design your tasks for these video conferencing live classes. The first is to ensure mostly STT in pairs and small groups. STT being, you familiar with that term? If anybody knows, could you put it in the chat room? In the chat box, yes. Simon says there, student talking time, yeah. So ensuring that there is student talking time, because, this is replacing our classroom, right? Often, certainly at the moment. And, we're language teachers. If the students are not talking, there's a problem. They're not going to be learning language. Producing language is an absolutely essential part of second language acquisition. This is what the theory tells us. It's not just listening, it's also talking. So we can do that very easily in breakout rooms. And when students are carrying out their activities in breakout rooms, we should be moving around them and monitoring those breakout rooms, moving from room to room, possibly listening, noting down any mistakes, and then pulling people back and discussing any of those, much as we would do in a normal bricks and mortar classroom. Just one little heads up about the monitoring. I don't know whether you found this yourselves, but if you do have, let's say you have 20 students, let's say you have 10 breakout rooms with pairs in each of the 10 breakout rooms, it's actually very time consuming for you to go to the breakout room. It takes those, 10 seconds. The time ticks by as you kind of beam in, and then you're there, and then you kind of come back out again and join another one. That takes time. The transition takes time, and you need to have thought about that time factor when you design the task and when you tell students how long they can be in breakout rooms. If it's a 5-minute task, I don't know if you can actually go to 10 breakout rooms. You'd be whizzing around. Something to keep in mind. The third point here, personalize. To basically personalize, talk about your own personal stuff. And that is extremely interesting for everybody. And a fourth point here, having some kind of built-in information gap. And by that, I mean, I know something that you don't know and vice versa. It's also inherently built into personalized activities because I'm telling you things about me that you don't know. So an information gap exists automatically when I show you this. Well, I mean, now you know what this is, but before you had no idea. There was an information gap. I had to tell you for you to know and for you to be interested and engaged. So personalized activities often have an inherent information gap that you can exploit. The fifth point here, a clear task aim, of course, and giving clear instructions. I mean, you know, probably even more important online, right? Because you can't really tell if students are following you. I don't know if this has happened to you before. You give instructions for a task, you go to the breakout rooms, and the students there go, what was it that we had to do exactly? So thinking about how you get the instructions into the breakout room as well. Are you going to message them? Are you going to put it on a slide in the breakout room? Are they going to take a photo of the instructions on their cameras and then use the camera next to them in the breakout room? Think about those kinds of logistics in advance. When you pull students back from the breakout room, of course, have them report back and share, and then have some kind of follow-up. So, for example, if I talked about this, I put the students in write a short paragraph with a photo of their precious object and put it into a forum that we're using. Or we could use Padlet, as somebody had suggested before. Okay, the second last point here, this accuracy versus fluency. You know, I'm sure you've asked yourself this. If your students are doing a fluency or a speaking task in a breakout room, when do you correct? Well, probably not when you kind of come in. In that case, you're going to note down areas for improvement and then, you know, address them at a later point, because the object or the aim of the activity is fluency. If, on the other hand, we're looking at accuracy, then maybe we do focus on correction. So if we're looking at individual vocabulary words and students are mispronouncing, then I would want to focus on correct pronunciation. Isabel, BORs, breakout rooms. And the final point then, of course, using external tools, which you could use during your session, or you could use before and after, like Google Doc. Yeah, and Donna was saying there, she gathers errors from the breakout rooms and brings them to the next class. Absolutely. And the great advantage, Donna, as I'm sure you found, is that you can anonymize the errors. So nobody knows who made those mistakes, and that's fine. Everybody learns from them. So some very basic task design tips. I would add maybe also ensure you design tasks that require the use of a camera if that's an issue. Something we don't need to worry about in the face-to-face class, right? In the physical class. Here are some task ideas. Again, you've probably come across these, the top 5 we've talked about. Any kind of ranking and ordering task where you have to put, you know, 5 items in order from like most important to least important. Any kind of controversial or ethical statements to discuss for higher levels in breakout rooms. Interviewing your partner on personalized activities and then reporting back. That's important. For lower levels, you could have students rehearsing dialogues in a breakout room and then performing the dialogue in the main room in front of the class, but give them that rehearsal time, which is also a very important part of language acquisition, rehearsal, repetition and rehearsal. Role plays can be carried out at any level in breakout rooms. You can just move around and monitor. And then finally, creating something together, which you could do during your live class. So you have your students in the breakout room and together they need to produce a Google Doc on something, or they need to create a slide on something, and they have a time frame to do that in. So all of these tools that we can introduce are ideas that you can use in your breakout rooms. If you have any great ideas for breakout room tasks, then please add them to the chat. I'm sure you've got some good ones as well. All right, so we'll go back to our 3 key elements. The first one is task design. The second one is online teacher skills. Let's have a look at our second element then, online teacher skills. So from your own experience, what do you think the online skills are that teachers need to engage their learners? What do you think are the key skills? You type a couple of ideas in the chat and I can have a sip of water. All right, tech knowledge, says Simon. Yep. Eleni says keeping them active, right? Screen sharing in breakout rooms, facilitating imagination. Be a good listener, says Valentina. Sure. Personalizing, yeah. Vicky says constant nomination. Yes, I like that idea that you're actually naming the students, right? Keeping them on their toes, nominating them to do things. Alan says enthusiasm, yeah. Okay. Good. You know, ever since the lockdown about a year ago, I've been working a lot with teachers and schools and institutions in this move to online. And I've noticed that there's been a move away from kind of total panic over the technology to much more emphasis on these sorts of skills that you're all mentioning here. If I had done this seminar a year ago, I think most people would have just put, technology, technology, technology. And of course, you do need to be familiar with your video conferencing platform, right? You need to know how to set up breakout rooms so that you can use them. But actually, that's not the difficult part. The task design and making your classes engaging is not about the technology. It's about the design of your classes. And people have, I think, we've come to that clear realization a year on. Okay, here are some of the skills that I think are important. First of all, your presence, and in synchronous classes, of course, like this, you need to be on the camera. I mean, I'm sure you're all on your cameras in your video conferencing lessons, but I remember doing some work with a university in Latin America a few years ago. This is about 6 years ago. The teachers had been told to move online. It was the kind of Friday to Monday scenario. They were told on the Friday. On the Monday, they were teaching online. This was due to the university not having actual physical space for the English language department. So they just decided to put the whole English language department online. And we went in and did some work and training with the teachers, and we found that over half of the teachers were not putting on their videos during their live sessions. No, well, the students weren't, but the teachers weren't. So you can imagine, student motivation was low, to put it mildly. So teacher presence as well in your asynchronous environment. So in your forums and so on, making sure you're there, praising people. People don't know that you're reading their stuff. So respond and praise and be seen, as it were. Use the student's name. I think somebody mentioned that before. Use the term nomination. Yeah, nominating students, using names, encouraging and praising, of course, being patient. Including your shy or reluctant students is actually relatively easy online. I don't know whether you found this as well, but I've heard from lots of teachers saying, my shy students, they love it. They're completely unrecognizable. They're in the breakout room and they're, chatting away. It was so not like this in the physical classroom. I don't know whether you've seen this, but it does seem to have helped some shyer or more introvert students to feel more confident online, in the medium online, interestingly. Yeah, a couple of you are saying yes, you've seen that. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, the next point there, create an online community, and you can do that through, for example, some kind of social media tool for the group, like WhatsApp or Kik or Facebook or whatever it is that's relevant or appropriate for your students. So are you using any social media tools with your students, apart from your live classes like this or your Moodle? It's a question for you, really. Does anybody use WhatsApp or Facebook or any of those? Martina says WhatsApp, yeah. Not all. Okay, and it's also going to depend on the age of your learners, of course. Something to consider. Okay, and students set up their own groups, yes, often, exactly. All right, just very quickly, I'm aware that time is ticking by. I do want to leave some time for questions at the end. The third point here, which is the structure of your session, the session structure. What are the key ingredients of a well-structured live online lesson? Well, I'm going to tell you what I think. Well, the first of all is obviously a plan. You need to have a plan like you would have for your normal classes, right? It has to be structured in some way. It needs to start somewhere, have a middle, and have an end. It needs to go somewhere. Hybrid class design is a little bit more challenging because that's where you have your students in the physical classroom and you also have your students beamed in online, and you need to ensure that they have a similar experience. So pair work can be a bit of a challenge. I've found, talking to teachers, that what seems to be most effective is if you're doing pair work, the physical classroom is not a problem. You have pairs together, but you pair people online. So online pairs, face-to-face pairs. You could mix physical classroom person with online person at the same time, but that means the logistics are a little bit more complex. Microphones, headphones, who hears what, which breakout room are they online? It starts getting complex in terms of the amount of technology and logistics that you need. So you can simplify it a little like that. But it is the most challenging for sure, hybrid class design. The third point here, ensuring that you have variety and pace in your online lessons. So breakout rooms, back, quiz, camera on, camera off, making sure that there's stuff happening. The fourth point, they're having a good ratio of teacher talking time versus student talking time. Unlike this session in which I've talked constantly, if this was a class, it would not be great. We would want the students to be producing as well. The, excuse me, the next point I've made before is this idea of having pre-live class work and then work that you do during the class and then after the live class work. So there's some kind of integration and it goes from one medium to the next. The next point here is sharing something personal. So this idea of group bonding. So for example, a precious object, an anecdote, a memory, a recent activity, it doesn't matter. It's personalized. Having clear learning aims and outcomes, of course, you know that. And at the end of the class, having some kind of summary or takeaway or review or some kind of closing of the session doesn't need to take long. All right, so if I've just said we need summaries and takeaways, I better give you a takeaway, and here it is. These, I think, are for me the most important takeaways, but you might have another takeaway, which you would be, it would be lovely if you would share that in the chat box. But I think that the key takeaways are: you need to use tasks that allow for student-student interaction in pairs, whether it's fully online or hybrid. You need to include personalization regularly, at least once in every class, I'd say. Include sharing and group bonding. So personalization can help you with that. Using realia online is fun, like I've just done with this statue, which you're all now tired of seeing, but it's a nice piece of realia. And also having little mini breaks. If you have a class that is over an hour, it's a very good idea to have a little short break in the middle after 40 or 45 minutes. And what I often do in longer sessions is to get people to go away and do something or get something. And that's highly effective. For example, I was doing a session with a group of teachers a couple of weeks ago. We had a break and I told everybody to go to the fridge and to bring back one vegetable. And they all came back and then the cameras were on and everybody was, I don't actually have a vegetable with me, but let's imagine this is one. Everybody was holding up their vegetable and I had them holding up the vegetables all the time, everybody in the gallery view, and each student had to say what they planned to cook with this particular vegetable. The interesting thing about that was that the next time we had a meeting, a couple of days later, I was able to say, does anybody remember what vegetable John had? And everybody remembered. It was incredible, kind of the visual impact. Another nice one for the realia and the mini breaks is if you have a higher level, go away for 2 minutes, have a 2-minute mini break, come back with your favorite book. It doesn't have to be an English book. It can just be your favorite book. And then everybody holds up their favorite book. And this actually is one of my favorite books. Highly, highly recommended if you don't know William Dalrymple. He's a fabulous writer. And then you get them to quickly tell you a little bit about the book. And you just nominate a couple of students to do that. And then in the next mini break, you can get them to go and do something else. The second last point there, emphasizing fluency over accuracy in your live classes, because this is an opportunity for students to speak, and ensuring that you have variety and fun in your sessions, I think, is one of the most important points. Okay, just before we pause for questions, I want to wrap up with a little closing activity. We had a warmer activity and now we have a closing activity. So you'll have seen that this session itself is structured. I'm trying to follow my own principles. So we had a warmer, we had a kind of an agenda, then we had the meat of my session, which was the 3 key points about how to make your sessions more engaging. Then we had a summary and some takeaways, and now we're doing a closing activity. So this activity, I'm going to say the first half of a sentence, and I want you to complete the sentence in the text chat box. Okay, so the first part. One thing I'm going to try out from this webinar in my own online class is, and I want you to complete the sentence. I'll repeat. One thing I'm going to try out from this webinar in my own online class is, all right, so we've got mini breaks, top 5, a vegetable mini break, right? Using realia, going to the fridge. Yeah, great, good. 3 pieces of paper, fantastic. Okay, next sentence. One thing I'm going to do tonight is, all right, you've got an online class. Some of you are going to cook dinner. Marit is going to eat ice cream. Stefania is going to sleep. Have a break. Great. All right, last sentence. One thing I'm going to do when this pandemic is over is, travel. Yes. Wow, a lot of people are going to travel. Isabel's going to go to the cinema. Elaine is going to go to the seaside. Claire's going to recover her baggage. Okay. Somebody's going to organize a party with their students. What a lovely idea. Vicky's going to go out for a huge steak dinner. Yeah. Yes, I mean, our restaurants are closed here in Spain at the moment as well at night. It's really, oof, I'm missing it. Karen's going to go on a cruise. Nice. Okay, so what language point was I reviewing there in those 3 sentences? Wow, Samantha's going to go to Australia. Going to, says Irene or Irene. Yes, that was using going to. Of course, you could have your closing activity using any grammatical structure, depending on your students. You could use something like, you could have them say something like, one thing I wish I had. And you can use much more complex structures depending on your students and what you've been working on, or just have open questions. It doesn't matter. It's a closing activity. Okay, there are my contact details. If you would like to get in contact with me with any questions or comments, please do. And I think we have about 10 minutes left for questions. And I believe that Martin is going to, yes, there he is, help us with those.
Hello. Thank you for that. Fantastic. And beautiful slides, by the way. And I'm still mulling over how you talk with MSN Messenger.
Slowly.
That must
Very
have been wonderful.
slowly.
Those were the days.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll start with Anna Marie's question, which is quite a general one, but she says, what is the ideal number of students for online lessons?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. In my mind, I mean, the smaller the better in a way, but probably you could manage up to 15, 12, 15, a bit like a physical language class. If you could keep the number under 15, that's great. 20 is doable. I would just use more breakout rooms, basically. The great thing about the virtual classroom or the video conferencing classroom is that you do have the breakout rooms, and you can really use those to great effect. So that's my answer. I would just like to know what sort of class sizes you all have. How many students would you typically have in your sessions? If you could just put thank you, Alan.
This would be an interesting one.
Yeah, no, okay, so Francesca has 18. Marie's up to 30, yeah. Okay, so 24.
25, 50, 80 for Sheila.
Okay, that's a big class.
That's huge, isn't it?
Yeah, you certainly couldn't do it. Well, you could do it face to face, but probably online is better. You just use the breakout rooms more. A lot of breakout rooms, I guess, and spreading yourself thin. Okay, that's interesting to see.
Now, Deesta has a question here where she talks about the mini breaks, or asks a question about the mini breaks. She wants to know more, what are they and what are the students supposed to do? Is it more than just a break, or is it getting them to do something?
Yeah, another great question. Thank you. Yes. Well, the idea is that if your class is longer than an hour, then give your students a break, just because it's like, they're sitting in the same position the whole time. It's kind of tiring. Just get them to kind of, stand up. So it doesn't matter what you do or if you do anything. You can just say to them, walk away from the camera, from the desk for 3 minutes and come back and not do anything. But what I like to do sometimes is to get them to do things, just because it can be fun to then integrate it into what you do next. For example, the vegetables idea, the favorite book idea. You could get them to stand up and then step away and then actually just do a few exercises and things. And the problem is sitting in front of a screen all day. That's the problem. And that's why we need to give them very short breaks, I think.
I suppose like in face-to-face, we get them up and move them, stand them up, move them around, but we can't do that. And I love the going to the fridge one. That's wonderful.
Yeah, the students love it.
Do you have any particular advice or examples of tasks that work well for one-to-one online lessons? And that's from Michelle.
I'd say many of the ones that we've talked about, Michelle, in this session work well. So personalizing. I mean, the great thing about one-to-one is that it's, it can be full-on personalization. So the student can, get them to talk about themselves, share things like I've done. You can make those kinds of activities last much longer and put the onus onto the student, get them to ask you. So if you ask them to share a precious object, will you do that first? And then get them to ask you questions and so on. So many of these sort of discussion type activities will work just as well, one-to-one.
Good. Okay. And Sarah here.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Martin. It just occurs to me, of course, because I haven't taught like this online one-to-one, but thinking about it, there's some fantastic opportunities. I mean, I was talking to a teacher the other day who was talking about how he'd seen a teacher do a cooking class with students. So take her, her tablet in a Zoom call like this, take it into the kitchen and then cook, and then talk to the students while cooking. That kind of thing, one-to-one, would be absolutely fantastic. You just get the student doing stuff and then get them, they have to talk through it. And you could, I can see an incredible range of possibilities with one-to-one, actually, well beyond the physical classroom.
Yeah, I mean, you could take somebody for a walk in your neighborhood.
Yeah, exactly. Tour around your house.
And go out and about, show them the sights in your lesson. You could do anything. Yeah, if it's one-to-one, it's quite, wow. Yeah. I like the cooking class though. That's quite a good one. Yeah. Sada asks about some other advice. You talked at the beginning about shy and reluctant students, but she would obviously may have an issue with this. She's asking the question, how can you engage shy or reluctant students?
Yeah, that's another great question. I suppose a little bit like you would do in the physical classroom, you wouldn't get the shy student to stand up in front of the class, right? You would let them kind of prepare on their own. So putting them into breakout rooms with just one other student is absolutely ideal for reluctant students, so that they can build up their confidence in a kind of a small, safe, let's say, environment. And it seems to be working. Certainly, I don't know if there's been any research, official research on this yet, but from what I've been hearing from teachers, the use of breakout rooms in very small groups or pairs is working really well for shy students. So my answer would be use breakout rooms, Sarah.
And Alessandra has a similar question about, students who just will not turn on their cameras and they have any kind of excuse. You mentioned about, mailing the parents and things like that. Is there anything else that you can really do?
Yeah, for younger learners, it would need to be, I think, part of the kind of, rules, the classroom rules, just like you wouldn't let your younger learners sit and eat in the classroom. Well, the online classroom, they have the camera on. But these are university students, I think what Alessandra was saying. Yeah, in that case, I think you need to negotiate with them and talk to them about it.
Yes,
yeah, it's a good age, actually. You can sit down and say, look, what exactly is the problem? Okay, if it's a problem, let's negotiate how this is going to work. And you might just start to introduce the kinds of activities that I've shown you where you need the camera for certain periods. Or rule is, if you're in a breakout room in a group of 2 or 3, you use the camera. You know, you're in a group of 2 or 3, you know, your hair is not such a big deal. It's more important that you're engaged in the conversations with your peers. So I would say an upfront conversation about this and the effect on engagement and motivation of not having the camera. And try, turn your camera off for a while. And how does that feel, folks? Is that nice? Shall I just keep my camera off? Discuss it. I think maybe that would be the best approach.
Well, we've only got time for one last question, which is from Donna, which is really the opposite of monopolizing conversations in the breakout room. How do you deal with students who monopolize the conversation in a breakout room?
Yeah, I suppose a bit like in the face-to-face classroom, you have to move them around, change their pairs regularly. And then also, set rules for the activity maybe. So it could be, you've each got to discuss, let's say we're doing the My Precious activity. All right, I want groups of 3, students A, B, C. Student A is the timekeeper. You've each got 2 minutes to talk about your object. Off you go. Make sure that the dominating student is not the timekeeper, and then time the interventions. That would be one way. You couldn't do it every time, but it might help make people a little bit more conscious of how much they're dominating or not the conversation.
Excellent, thank you. Some really great tips there. A wonderful talk with lots of practical information that people can go away and start using immediately, because I think we're all teaching online. So start using it today. Get the vegetables out. Wonderful. Thank you very, very much, Nicky.